Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today, my guests are Jim and Mai from the Spanish and Go podcast, one of my favorite podcasts for learning Spanish. And I'm not joking when I'm saying that I've listened to 50 plus episodes of their podcast, pretty much every episode. And I'm very happy to have them as guests today. Very happy to finally speak to them after listening to hundreds of hours of their voices. So, Jim and Mai, how are you guys doing? Welcome.
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Yes, hola.
Hola. It's almost a trip for me to hear you guys speak English because I've only heard hundreds of hours of you guys in Spanish, but I immediately recognize your voices.
Well, yeah, it's kind of strange for me to hear my speak English sometimes, at least until we started doing the podcast where we have a breakdown section for our members in the podcast membership,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I hear her speak English more often. But yeah, when you're used to hearing somebody speak one language for a long time and then they switch, it is kind of a
Yeah.
trip at first.
Yeah, I make a lot of mistakes, so
That's okay. So do I in Spanish.
And I said 50 plus, but I think it must be at least 100 plus. How many episodes do you think you guys have published?
We're on 142 episodes.
That's the one next week.
Right.
Yeah.
142. And I've listened, I've probably only skipped maybe 10 episodes, I think. So I've listened to almost every episode going back to, I think 2020 is when you guys got started. I've listened to
Yeah.
almost
Yeah.
every single one.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Do you have a favorite episode?
It all kind of blends together in my
Yeah.
head. It's hard for me to say. That's not a cop out answer. Like I haven't listened to them. I've really listened to all of them.
That's awesome.
So I was thinking for people that have not listened to the podcast, obviously maybe tell them right off the bat where they can go listen to it, and then also just explain a little bit about your podcast if you could describe it.
Yeah, so you can find the Learn Spanish and Go podcast pretty much everywhere where there's podcasts, right? We are on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Pandora. What else is there?
Overcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a ton of podcasting platforms. I think we're on at least maybe 15 or so,
Yeah.
perhaps more. Yeah, I just see the stats for the most common ones: Apple Podcast, Spotify, Pandora. Those are kind of the main ones people listen to us on.
Yeah, but there on the podcast, we like to have conversations, natural conversations about topics that are interesting to us, things related to how to help people improve their Spanish skills, but also traveling and visiting other Spanish speaking countries. We are on a mission. We are on a mission to visit every Spanish speaking country in the world. So we also like to cover different cultural aspects about the places we're visiting or that we plan to visit in the near future.
That's right. Yeah, we cover a lot of cultural aspects as well as things regarding holidays and traditions and differences in the language. All things travel Spanish, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I love it because when Christmas is coming up or Dia de los Muertos is coming up or whatever holiday in Mexico, I can almost count on you guys to have an episode on it so that I can get a little bit caught up. And then when I speak to my Mexican girlfriend or whomever, they're like, "How did you know that?" And I'm just like, I don't say I know Spanish and Go podcast. I just shrug my shoulders and say, like, I don't know. I just know these things.
A friend told me.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially now that we're recording this around the holidays, we've been focused on Christmas and New Year's and talking about the celebrations and traditions around that. And some of these things are still kind of new to me, like la rama, like the
branch.
yeah, the branch, the Mexican version of the Christmas tree. It's such a foreign concept to me still, but my mother-in-law, she always has one up every year on Christmas, and that's actually one of our next episodes that we'll be releasing.
Yeah.
What is La Rama? Because yeah, tell me. I need to know.
Yes, so here in Mexico, and we also learned that in some other Latin American countries, people get together, especially children and teenagers, they get together and they decorate a branch, a dry branch of a tree, and they go house by house singing villancicos, which is Christmas carols in Spanish, and they collect money for different things. Most times it's just money for themselves to buy their Christmas presents or to organize like a Christmas party of like the neighborhood or the block where they live. Yeah.
And some people use it as a substitute, a stand-in for a
Hmm.
traditional Christmas tree because there aren't a lot of pine trees in Mexico. There
Hmm.
are pine trees, but just not as many as we have up north.
Yeah.
I see. Good to know. Because I guess for reference, we're recording this episode in mid-December, but it's not going to come out probably till end of January ish. So,
Mm.
merry belated Christmas to everyone
Yeah.
listening. Um, so, I'd love to hear a little bit about your guys' background, and so that the audience can understand where you guys are coming from. Maybe tell us where you are individually from, and where you and how you met.
Hmm.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm from Rochester, Minnesota. I'm a gringo from the States, and I am a music producer. I still consider myself one, even though I haven't been for several years now since we started this project. But before I met Mai, that was my main focus. I'm a musician, really into technology, and I started my recording studio. Well, I guess you could say got into the business around the time I was like 13 or so. And I was lucky enough to have an uncle who was also in the music business, and he took me around on different tours that he was on. He toured with national touring acts like Metallica and Korn and Limp Bizkit and all of these different bands that were really famous at the time. And I got to go around the country with him, and I think that's what really sparked my desire to travel. So after years of doing that and years spent in the studio producing different musicians, I decided, this is fun and all, but I'd really like to get out and travel some more. And I figured the best way to get headed down that path where I could actually get out of Minnesota and start exploring more of the world was to learn Spanish. It made the most sense. It was the language I studied the most in school, even though I didn't remember much. I figured, well, at least with Spanish, I could visit 20 or so different countries and be able to get around okay with that. And so I started learning Spanish. A friend of mine recommended a platform called italki. Back then, it was a little different, but it was a website where you could actually, a little bit like Facebook, where your profile would indicate what languages you spoke, which ones you were learning, at which level. And that's how I got connected with Mai.
Yeah, and so I am from Colima, Mexico, which is on the Pacific coast of the country. There isn't much in Colima. I mean, we have two volcanoes. We have lots of lime trees and coconuts. It's very tropical, and I am a language teacher. So after I graduated, I wanted to find a way to keep practicing my English because I knew that I was going to be working all the time, that I wasn't going to be reading or doing homework in English. So a friend told me about the same website, italki, and that's how I met Jim. And I think he had some vacation time after a while of just like emailing back and forth and skyping, and I told him, hey, you should come to Mexico. And he was like, oh yeah, maybe I will. And he did. And that's how it all started back in 2011. We met in 2010 online.
Right.
No
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
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 Italki was around since then.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It was different. When we were chatting back and forth, it's not like I was paying Mai to be my teacher. It was much more
Like pen pals.
like an
Right.
exchange.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure Italki has since removed this feature. There should
Mm-hmm.
be some other website. Maybe there is, and I'm just not aware of it. But it was really convenient to have this website where you could just see people from around the world who were interested in learning different languages. And so it was a perfect match. And after about 6 months of chatting, just as friends, we didn't really take it all that seriously. We didn't know what would become of the friendship. But Mai invited me down, and we discovered there was more to our relationship than we originally thought, or there began to be a bit more, and we fell in love. And she was showing me around Mexico. She was really being my guide, and teaching me Spanish, and visiting all of these incredible places and explaining these different cultural differences that I had no idea about before visiting Mexico. And we decided that we should start a business together where we could combine our forces. Basically, her specialty is teaching languages, and mine is recording and producing audio and video. And so we thought, well, maybe we could do something with this, and we started the Spanish and Go YouTube channel. A lot happened.
Yeah.
It's hard to sum everything up in just a few minutes. I mean, we did decide to get married, and
Move to the
move to
US.
the US, get your green card,
Yeah.
and save up enough to where we could actually start this project. But this is something that we wanted to start before we even talked about getting married. It was
Mm-hmm.
more so figuring out, okay, what are the things we need to do to be able to pull this off? And that's where immigration and everything came in.
Mm-hmm.
But we
Hmm.
really kicked off the project in 2016 when we started the channel.
Right, right. And I know you've had some episodes talking about the U.S. visa process and so forth.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Not fun.
I try to erase that part of my memory sometimes because it's, yeah, a lot of paperwork, a lot of waiting.
A lot of money.
Yeah. And it could have been much more. I mean, we did everything ourselves. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't hire an attorney or anything, and it's still expensive that way.
Yeah.
I guess since we're talking about it, one common theme for uh, gringos, Canadians, and Americans that go down to Latin America is maybe they meet a significant other, but it's very difficult to bring them back to North America. What are your thoughts on that? Anecdotes and suggestions?
Oh, yeah, it was. I mean, I feel like for me, it wasn't as difficult. It's just the waiting. They make you wait a long time. I didn't even have a tourist visa when I met Jim. So we went through the whole thing of applying for a tourist visa and then all the interviews you have to go through. And after I went to the US for the first time, I think that first time I stayed only 2 months and then I came back to Mexico. And the second time I went with the tourist visa, they took me aside in the airport. They took me to the little room where they have all like the people who,
The
Hmm.
questioning room.
yeah,
Yeah.
they seem to be in trouble, right? Like people who maybe overstayed their visas before, or just people who were unsure about letting into the country. And so they were asking me, like, I think I had three people interview me there. And they were like, "So, your boyfriend, what does he do for a living?" And I always kept saying, "He's not my boyfriend. He owns a recording studio. He's my student." So I think, like, if I would have said that we were in a relationship back then when I had a tourist visa, that would have been enough for them to say, nope, you're not coming into the US because you could overstay your visa, your tourist visa, right?
Hmm.
And I know that a lot of people do this. So if you have plans of going with a significant other who lives in the US, maybe don't say that you are in a relationship with them.
Well, and backing up a little bit, I think for people who are unfamiliar with the process, they might be like, what's this tourist visa
Mm,
about? Like, can't you just go to the US? No, Mexicans can't just go to the United States. You have to first get a passport, which most people don't have. That's a process in itself. But then you have to actually apply for a visa to go and visit the United States. It's not like where if you're from the US or Canada or most countries,
Mm-hmm.
you can just go to
Yeah, it's not visa
the
free.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an important distinction.
Yes, and when you apply for a visa as a Mexican, when you apply for a US visa, they want to see that you have some kind of tie to your country. So they want to see that you own property in your country, or that you have a car, that you have a well paying job that is going to have you back in Mexico, right? They don't
Mhm.
want to see that you don't have any money, you own nothing, you don't have a job, and you're applying for a tourist visa.
Yeah, they don't want to think that, oh, it would just be too easy for this person to overstay their visa or
Mm-hmm.
never go back to their country.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that is a process in itself. I am in a number of groups of expats in Mexico, and it's funny to see people complain about the changes in immigration in Mexico because most people don't have any idea how difficult it is for Mexicans to get into the US. It's
Mm-hmm.
laughably easy by comparison for people in the US to move to Mexico.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then after that, well, after visiting the US on a tourist visa for a second time, we knew it was going to be very difficult for me to go back into the US with a tourist visa. So we just decided to get married. Actually, Jim's mom suggested, "Why don't you guys just get married and and apply for a green card?" And we're like, "Yeah, maybe we should do that."
Both of us said we were never going to get married because our parents they divorced when we were growing up, and so it was kind of like, well, why would anybody get married? But
Yeah,
then you find yourself in a situation where it's like, well, the only way we're going to be able to continue this relationship is to seal the deal,
yeah.
and so we did.
Yeah. And then that's when the green card process started, which was what, 2013 we got married.
Yeah,
And I became a citizen in
2021.
2021.
Yeah,
So,
so I guess about 8 years.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad everything worked out. And I guess it took a while. And I think you guys lived in Puerto Rico for a period of time as well, right?
Yeah, we lived there for almost 3 years. And part of the idea there was looking at the immigration website in the US. They give you estimated processing times. And we thought, well, if we go to Puerto Rico, it seems to be one of the faster options in terms of processing a citizenship application or a naturalization application. But we also wanted to go there because it's primarily Spanish speaking. We had a number of options, right? If we're going to run Spanish and Go, it didn't make much sense to do it out of Minnesota, the third coldest state in the US. And there are a number of Spanish speakers there, but Spanish is absolutely not the main language that's spoken in Minnesota. So we thought, oh, we could go to maybe Texas or Southern California or Florida. But Puerto Rico was an option, and we decided, well, that makes sense. Not a lot of people talk about Puerto Rico. We didn't know much about Puerto Rico at the time, and so we decided, well, how about we move there for a while and do our thing, do Spanish and Go, and talk about differences in the culture and the language there on the island. And yeah, it turns out there's a pretty big demand for that type of information, just because there's not a lot of people who cover that sort of thing in Puerto Rico. There's not a lot of content creators there making podcasts or videos about the island. So we found that that turned out to be a pretty good decision after all.
And give me your guys' spiel on Puerto Rico overall. A little bit expensive, nice beach towns, all that. Tell me about it.
It's beautiful. Yeah, it's there's a lot of nature, lots of hidden waterfalls, and there's a park there called El Yunque, which is the only cloud forest or rainforest in the U.S. Right?
In the national forest system,
Yeah.
or maybe it's the park system, I don't remember which. But yeah, it's the only tropical rainforest. There are other rainforests, but it's the only
Okay.
tropical rainforest.
Yes. Yes. So very tropical, very hot and humid, beautiful beaches. there are some other smaller islands which have some of the most beautiful beaches in the world, and we really enjoyed our time there exploring. Just we were part of like a hiking group, and we would go out almost every weekend just to find a new hidden place, because you can just drive around the island and stop somewhere in the middle of nowhere and find a beautiful swimming pool, like a natural pool. And we loved that about the place. But living there is a little bit more complicated, I think. There is, well, bureaucracy, it's a lot of people complain about this in Mexico too. Whatever you want to do, it takes, I don't know, twice or maybe three times as long as it would take in other countries, because they make you go back with a different paper they didn't ask at first. I don't know. It's complicated.
Well, yeah, take getting your driver's license, for example. You have to actually get an exam by a doctor to make sure that you're fit to drive before you actually go in and do the whole process at their version of the DMV. So there's a lot of that going on the island. There are other things that make it difficult to live there, like the infrastructure. The roads are in pretty rough shape. The electricity goes out several times a week, and sometimes, well, most times you have no idea when it's going to turn back on. It could be 15
Hmm.
minutes, it could be 5 hours. Uh,
Or days.
yeah, once after the earthquake, was it in 2020?
I think
Right?
so.
There, the electricity went out. There was a big earthquake that the epicenter was at the southern end of the island, but the electricity was out for, I think, like 4 or 5 days.
Hmm.
And it's really hard to prepare for that sort of thing when you've got food in the fridge and no plan for, like, what are we going to
Yeah,
do
it's
for those
tough.
days where maybe we can't work, maybe we don't have internet. And yeah, it's tricky.
What's your overall recommendation about Puerto Rico? Do you think it's a good spot for digital nomads or expats, or do you think they're better off just taking the full leap outside the US and going to Latin America, Mexico, Nicaragua, etc.?
Yeah, a lot of people think of Puerto Rico before maybe some other countries like the ones you listed, Mexico, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, because there is that tie to the US, right? And that can be convenient in some cases, but I would say most people would be better off going to another country if you're looking for somewhere that has a lower cost of living and has a more stable infrastructure. So if you're trying to be a digital nomad, I think uh, Mexico and Costa Rica and Ecuador, they may have more stable infrastructures for that's more conducive to working abroad and working online. So yeah, there are a number of things that make Puerto Rico difficult. If you're very well off, a lot of these problems can be avoided because there are expediting services in
For
Puerto Rico.
everything.
Yeah, if you've got the money, then you can afford a generator or maybe a Tesla power wall or something. So if the electricity goes out, you can still have electricity at least for yourself. And not everybody has access to those resources, right? So
Yeah.
in our experience, living in Puerto Rico was very similar to maybe the cost of living in Minneapolis, for example, or maybe a little cheaper than Chicago for comparison. It depends on where you are on the island, of course, and your standard of living. You can definitely live a very luxurious lifestyle in Puerto Rico, but we tend to like the more humble places. Staying in neighborhoods where the locals live, not being surrounded by just other expats or people who have moved to the area to work
Yeah.
abroad, right?
Yeah, Jim. Speaking of Minneapolis, I'm not. You can tell I'm not American. I'm Canadian. Um, but speaking of Minneapolis, right? You guys are both American citizens now.
Mhm.
Technically, you could live full time in the U.S. You could be in New York City, San Francisco, whatever you want to do. But you guys choose to continue to live in Latin America as a a couple where one person's American, one person's Mexican. And so I would love for you to tell the audience why Latin America? Why do you choose to continue spending the majority of your time there?
That's a good question. I think the weather in Minnesota is a big part. It's cold there. But yeah, we could live pretty much anywhere in the US. We decided to live in Mexico. Um, because I'm from Mexico, maybe I'm a little bit biased to the country. The food is delicious here. I don't know. I feel like we celebrate things in such a different way that I think it's also for us interesting to experience these things and then share the things we are experiencing with others who might also be interested in moving to Mexico or just visiting Mexico or other countries. Um, the food is good.
Yeah,
Did I say that already?
you did say that already,
Okay.
but it's worth repeating.
Yeah.
No, we are on a mission to reiterate to visit every Spanish speaking country. So
Hmm.
that's the goal right now. And I think in the process, we'll discover where we would like to settle down ultimately. Right now, just from our travels, we absolutely enjoy Mexico, some parts more than others. For example, we both love Guanajuato, we love Querétaro, maybe Cholula. Those would all be good options for settling down in. At least that's kind of what we're thinking for now. We visited Ecuador, and I could definitely see us settling down in Ecuador as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, the things I mentioned, the weather, the culture, the people, when you're in Mexico, you probably have experiences that you've never had in the US or Canada in terms of just the warmth
Mhm.
you'll receive from the people that you meet, from absolute strangers, people who will invite you over to dinner to meet their family after talking to them for like 15 minutes in the street.
Mhm.
That's never happened to me in the US before, but it absolutely is something that has happened to me here
Yeah.
in Mexico multiple times. And so it's a different pace of life. Yes, one factor for a lot of people is it's more affordable. Absolutely, it's more affordable in Mexico, but I wouldn't say that's the number one thing. I mean, the food, the people, the culture, the climate, those are all huge perks, huge advantages over living in the U.S. And of course, there are places in the U.S. That have more moderate weather or warmer weather, but all of these different aspects combined make it a better option, at least for us, to live here in Mexico.
So you'd say a lot of it is the social and cultural aspects and just the way that you feel in Latin America.
Yeah. I love the food down here. I love the diversity of the country. I mean, right now we're in Akumal, which does see a lot more tourism. It is warmer than other parts of Mexico. We really enjoy central Mexico, where it's not as warm, but it's warmer than Minnesota, that's for
Mhm.
sure.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And the food is excellent there. It is tends to be more economical in the central part of Mexico. But yeah, lots of reasons.
Very cool. What countries do you still have to cross off the list?
A lot.
Yes, so many. This year, I would love to go to Spain. I have never been to Europe, so Spain is really high on the list. But I would also love to visit Chile, Colombia, and Argentina. Those are like top of my list.
Yeah, I would say the same. Colombia, Chile, Argentina. I want to go back to Spain. I feel like we want to delay Spain a little bit just because we want to do it justice. Obviously, Spanish comes from Spain, so when we go there, we want to make sure that we've got a good rhythm of producing content. We want to get more consistent on YouTube again and get back to releasing on a regular schedule. We've done that for 142 plus weeks now with the podcast, every week releasing an episode. So we want to get back into that rhythm for covering some of the bigger countries like Spain when we go there. But I definitely want to visit Spain. Maybe this year. We'll see. what we can do. I mean, this year meaning 2023 when you release this episode.
Hmm. I guess, well, you'll have to hit all of them, right? You'll have to hit Bolivia, Uruguay,
Yeah,
maybe a couple more Central American spots,
yeah.
There's a country in Africa that speaks
Equatorial
Spanish as their
Guinea,
main.
Uh
Yep,
huh.
yep, that's right. So,
Western Sahara.
uh-huh. Yeah, we've got a lot ahead of us. It is a little intimidating, but I know we're going to make it happen.
Nice. So I guess speaking of Mexico, maybe we could talk a bit more about your favorite spots and some underrated spots because my audience loves hearing about hidden gems.
Mm-hmm. Well, like Jim mentioned, we love Central Mexico. I really see ourselves maybe settling down there one day. Our favorite spots are, of course, Guanajuato, which is the place we have spent the most time in Central Mexico, and that's where we had our first Spanish immersion retreat back in 2019, I think. And so that place is just beautiful. Not a lot of people have heard about it. Guanajuato is the place where actually Mexico was born, like Mexico as we know it now. That's the place where the independence movement started. So huge battles against Spain happened there. So there's that city is like walking in a museum.
Yeah.
Every single corner has a story, and yeah, it's very rich in culture and history. We love that place. But also Querétaro, we really like that city. Is I think the fastest growing city in Latin America, probably.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely in Mexico. It's the fastest growing city. A lot of people from Mexico City are moving there. And I think maybe even at a faster rate now
Mm-hmm.
that more gringos are going to Mexico City. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
maybe one of the, well, definitely one of the biggest hotspots for digital nomads right now, going to
Mm-hmm.
Mexico City. Seems like right now, I think the two biggest cities that are seeing an inflow of foreigners are Mexico City and Oaxaca.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so Querétaro is a great option, especially for us because we love Guanajuato so much. If we're in Querétaro, we're only a few hours away from Guanajuato. We'd only be a couple of hours or 2 or 3 hours from Mexico City, and it has its own airport there, good public transportation. It's
Very
very,
clean.
very clean, very safe, and not too many tourists. So a lot of great vegetarian and vegan options there as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
Tons of restaurants. I mean, aside from the vegan and vegetarian options, there's just tons of options for um, fine dining, and there's a microbrewery there that's really cool to visit. And yeah, a lot of good things about there. We visited. What's another good?
Cholula.
Yeah, Cholula. Cholula is a really cool city. It's very,
It's in the state of Puebla.
yeah, it is a university town and they have the largest pyramid in the world there. A lot of people don't know this, but the pyramid is actually mostly covered. So if it were uncovered, then it would be, um, well, it is the largest. It's just that so much of it is covered that it doesn't look like it's the
Mm-hmm.
biggest in the world.
Mm.
And there's a lot to do there. A lot of the same. It's clean, safe, a lot of good places to eat. Uh,
It's smaller than Querétaro, so it feels also more local, more like a little town.
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I really enjoyed visiting San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I feel like that's a little more well known. We didn't spend a lot of time there, but it is beautiful, and it looks like there's a lot of things to see and do in that area as well.
Yeah.
But we could go on and on. I mean, Mexico is such a big country. There's so many different places, and I think the best of it really are the places where you just don't see tons of tourists.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's the best mix. I think that's what a lot of people are looking for, are places that are safe, cheap, and not too many tourists.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And now for people who are able to work remotely, now that Starlink is available in Mexico, it's like, well, you could live close to a volcano and get good internet now. It's like
Hmm.
the country is really opened up in that aspect, just because technology has made it easier to stay connected than ever.
Other than Merida and the Yucatan, which is famous for being very safe, um, where else would you recommend for like safe locations in Mexico?
Yeah, I think the ones we mentioned before, like Querétaro, we know it's very safe. The city of Guanajuato, we know it's very safe too. Um, where else?
A lot of people will go to Puerto Vallarta
Oaxaca.
or Chapala or
Yeah.
Ajijic.
Mm-hmm.
Those are common expat destinations. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But really, the more we travel around Mexico, I feel like it's just so much safer than most people make it out to be. I mean, there is a lot of violence and kidnappings and stuff like that in Mexico. If you look at the news, I mean, it's easy to see that there are bad things happening in the country. But for the most part, if you're not involved in the drug trade, or you're not getting involved with cartels or that sort of thing, I mean, you're not, for the most part, going to be a target or see any of this sort of thing. So, I mean, when you come down to visit, I think most people get a completely different picture of Mexico than what they had imagined before visiting.
Hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like you guys really enjoy the interior cities, for lack of a better word,
Mm-hmm.
sort of in central Mexico. Right now, you're in Akumal, which is in Quintana Roo.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been to the monkey sanctuary yet?
No, we haven't, and it's not too far from here.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. We've seen signs for it, but we haven't visited.
Yeah, we should.
We have seen monkeys in the neighborhood we're staying in right now, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, the wild monkeys too.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's a nice area. How does it feel to be in the Quintana Roo area? Do you feel a bit like you want to get back to the quote unquote real Mexico, or are you enjoying it down there?
We have different opinions on being in this area.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I don't like being in an area where if we go to a restaurant and sit down, automatically they're giving me the menu in English, or they're trying to speak to me in English automatically. It's like, I didn't come all the way down to Mexico to speak English and to have a menu in English. I came down because the culture is different, not just because of the weather, right? We've been in a lot of different parts of Mexico, and it's really, the culture and the food and the people, as I mentioned previously, that make Mexico special for me. So being down here, I don't know. Like the other day, we just got to Cancun. We landed there, and we were going to stay one night at an Airbnb. And we got there, and and right away we met a couple of people who were staying at the apartment right next to us, and they're like, "Welcome to Mexico. We're from Belgium, and we're visiting for the first time." And it just was like, well, yeah, we've been in Mexico. Maya's from Mexico, right? And we've been visiting around, and like, it is such a popular first touch point for a lot of people outside of the country, right? But
Hmm.
it's like, for me, there's just so much more to see. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it doesn't feel like the authentic Mexico, and being around a lot of people who are here and have no desire to even learn just a few words of Spanish or get to know the locals or the culture. It just feels a little bit like the Las Vegas of Mexico or something. Like, it, people just come because it's like a giant water park for them, right? And that
Hmm.
has its place, but to me, I just feel like there's so much more of the country to get to know. And a lot of people who come down here, they miss out on that, especially the ones who don't even step foot outside of a resort.
And I like it here. I mean, I have family here. My dad and my sister moved here more than 15 years ago. So,
From Colima.
yeah, from Colima. So I feel like the connection to this area. I also lived here early on in our relationship. I used to work here also at a hotel. So I don't know. I feel like it is a good place to live. I think it depends on where you go. Like Jim was saying, yes, there's a lot of people who come here and only stay in their all-inclusive resort, but there are areas of here, Playa del Carmen or Cancun, where there are more locals, where you can just go to
Hmm.
the stores and everything you see is locals. And I don't know. I feel like I feel like if someone comes to this part of Mexico and wants to connect with the culture, they can do it too. I mean, there is a little bit of like a pre-Hispanic culture
For
and
sure.
history thing here with the Mayans. And there are towns where they have their own traditions and their food and everything. Maybe it just gets a little buried under with all of the other touristy things, other international cuisines, right? The things that maybe
Hmm.
foreigners are looking for because they don't know about the more traditional dishes that they can find here. And I see those things. Like I know, I understand that there is more here than just the resorts and the restaurants.
There's almost like two worlds.
Right. Yeah. But if you really want to connect with the culture, you can do it. You can still do it.
I remember I was in Akumal and I went to this place. If you haven't been, you can look it up. It's
Uh-huh.
called Taqueria Chucky or Chucky.
Chucky.
And
Uh-huh.
if you know if you know the movie Chucky for
Uh-huh.
the Americans, where it's like a doll with a knife and
Uh-huh.
like blood running down the face of the doll, that's the motif of this taqueria,
Yes.
of this taco restaurant. And it's very local. It's like a hand
Mm-hmm.
painted sign, and they literally have small Chucky dolls all over the restaurant. And it's very bizarre, but it was super, super local.
Yeah.
The menu is just like handwritten and served to you in a plastic plate and all that type of stuff. And I had really, really good tacos there. So that's an Akumal.
That's
Yeah.
hilarious. We'll have to look for that place.
I was gonna ask you, Jim, because you spent so much time in Mexico. What are we doing about citizenship, buddy? Are you working towards that?
Yeah, yeah. So that's been a goal of ours for a long time now. I mean, since we talked about my getting her citizenship, it was only logical for me to get my citizenship here in Mexico so that we would both be dual citizens and it would be super easy for both of us to travel to and from each other's countries. And so I am a temporary resident, soon to be permanent. I guess I have another year before I can apply to be a permanent resident. But immediately after that, as long as I'm approved to be a permanent resident, which I don't see why I wouldn't be, then I could apply to be a Mexican citizen. And so if everything goes well in about a year and a couple of months, maybe, then I also can become a Mexican citizen.
Sweet. So what did you do the 4-year temp?
Well, it's a little bit different if you are married to a Mexican citizen. So
Mm.
for me, I was able to go to Manzanillo. There's been a lot of talk lately about the delays in getting your residency here in Mexico. So we went to Manzanillo where we knew there wouldn't be a lot of tourists. And
That's
we,
in Colima, the state where I'm from.
right.
Yep.
Hmm.
And so we called ahead of time. We made sure we had all of the paperwork that we needed. Like I said, it was a little bit easier because, for example, our marriage certificate was in Colima or is in Colima, so it was easy to have that and for them to
Yeah, that's a good
verify.
question. Sorry, did you
Mhm.
get married in legally in Mexico or in the States or both?
In Mexico.
Hmm.
Yep,
Okay.
we got married in Comala, in
Hmm.
Colima. Hmm.
And it gets like recognized in the States?
Yeah, how does that work? I don't
Yeah,
remember.
when we applied for my residency, I
Mhm.
remember we just had to translate, like a find certified translator,
Hmm.
and they translated the certificate, and then we did the oh, I don't know how to say this in English, apostilla.
The
Yeah,
apostle.
apostille. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and that was all they asked to like verify the marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. So with all of the right documents, we were able to go to the immigration office in Manzanillo right away in the morning. There wasn't even a line. We were first in line. Um, and we got in even early, like
Hmm.
10 minutes before they were going to open. They let us in. And I'm pretty sure it was less than 4 hours later.
I think it was two.
I got my residency card, and they didn't ask too many questions. Usually they'll just give you the 1 year right away, but I told them, it'd be more convenient if I had the 2 year, because then after 2 years I would be eligible for the permanent residency card. So, um,
They said okay.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
and so yeah, next time I go in, I'll just apply for my permanent residency, and then, like I said, I can go for citizenship.
That's awesome, man. That'll be very fun.
Yeah,
Definitely a couple things I wanted to ask about your guys' routine, but and then also about language learning, and then we'll talk about the retreats and stuff. Um, I wanted to ask about the apartments. I get the vibe that you guys do a lot of like homestays and home away things.
Hmm.
Is that what
yeah,
you're doing now?
that's right. Yeah. Yeah, we've been doing a lot of them because we love this platform so much. It's trusted house sitters, where you can find opportunities to either just watch people's houses while they go on vacation or they're away, or for you to watch their pets and their house at the same time. So most of the time we're watching, maybe a dog or a dog and a cat, or maybe just a cat. And it's been a great opportunity for us to um, get to experience the places that we're visiting, and really reduce what we are spending to travel around, right? So sometimes we'll find sits where we're staying somewhere and taking care of their pets for a month or more, and that saves you a ton of money right away, especially considering that the places we're staying at are usually really nice.
Hmm.
When we're just staying somewhere for a few days, we'll often use Airbnb, and we'll look for, kind of budget places, because we know we mainly just need a place to work. And then other than that, we can go out and, get food and visit other places in the area. But with trusted house sitters, it's like we have our own apartment that's equipped with everything that we need. It's got a kitchen, it's got, um, solid internet, because people are living there.
Hmm.
Uh, often are people who work online, or need to stay connected. So they have a solid internet connection. Uh,
We've also been very lucky with the house seats, and the host usually let us use their car,
yeah,
which is also
Wow.
really nice.
yeah. That's the case with this sit and the last one. So we're
Hmm.
able to get around really easily. And, as long as the animals are small enough, usually it's easy to travel with them as well. Like the two dogs we're taking care of right now, we could just go to Cancun if we wanted to with them, and it would be easy enough to just put them in the car, drive there, and then walk around town with
Hmm.
them if we wanted to.
Whatever your epiphany's been around this house sitting stuff, because I definitely should do it, because I think for a lot of digital nomads, we could pretty much work for anywhere, as long as it's like meets a decent level of niceness. If you're in a relationship, you don't really need the bars and stuff. You can pretty much go anywhere that's kind of nice and has internet.
Hmm.
And so I think a lot of people are pretty down to do this. It's just a question of like investing the time and applying to be the house sitter and so forth. What are the epiphanies, and what's sort of the short and sweet about what people need to know about house sitting?
Yeah, a few things. So when you're getting started, it can be intimidating, right? Because you might think, well, who's going to trust me? I don't have maybe any references
Or
or
experience.
experience. Yeah. So the main thing is just filling out your profile, trying to put yourself in the shoes of of the homeowners, and to do the background check that's on the website, and to find a few references. Maybe you've taken care of your aunt's cat for a few days before, and
Mm-hmm.
you could ask her, hey, can you go onto this website and leave a review for me? And they have a process for doing that so that it's a verified review. And that way you can at least get started. And then I'd say the first thing you need to do is, don't think, well, I'm going to sign up on this website and then I'm going to go to Mexico. If you're already settled in one place, I would look for something local that you wouldn't really need to do the sit for, right? Like maybe you already have an apartment, so you might not be thinking, oh, I'm just going to sit for someone close by. But this is really a great way to build up your references on the website, which is key to getting more sits. You have to have some positive references for people to trust. Oh, okay, I'm going to have this person come over, and they've done a good job for other people in the past. So to build that up, look for something close to where you are that's last minute, because sometimes people will post on the website, oh, I need someone tomorrow or in 2 days or in 3 days to come sit for maybe just a day or two. And that way you can start building up your references, because they're more likely to pick you, the local who's not too far away, who knows the area, and you're willing to do it. You don't have to fly in from some other place, which is reassuring to them, because they know that it's not
Hmm.
likely that there's going to be some sort of travel issue that you couldn't get to their house. And that's a great way to start.
Mm-hmm. I also think that people who do this, yes, they want to travel and explore other places, but also loving the pets is a huge part of this. We house sat for a person who, um, I think one of the first people who were house sitting for her, when they arrived to her house and she was getting ready to leave, the this other person was like, oh, I'm allergic to cats, and she had a cat. And so I'm like, why are you doing this thing if you don't even want to spend time with the pets, right? So I think that's a
Okay.
huge
Right.
part
Because a
of.
lot of it's pet sitting.
Yeah, yeah, and people are trusting you that you're going to take good care of their pets. I mean, these are not just animals, they're part of a family.
Hmm.
And it's, I feel like it's like going away and leaving your child with someone you don't know a little bit.
Right,
So
right, right.
just reassuring people that you are there to take care of their pets' needs, and that you'll do whatever it takes to make them feel comfortable and be safe, right?
Okay, so I'm gonna upload a photo of me with like a dog in my arms, like
Yes.
giving it a kiss,
Yes.
Yes, that's
and
what we did too. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
when we didn't have any reviews, the first one we did was in Puerto Rico. That's where we were living. And we had a bunch of photos with us and other dogs we've taken care of, or cats. And
Animals we've rescued from the street. Yeah.
yes, yes. So that really helped, I think.
Yeah. And it
Okay.
helps to have a platform. I mean, maybe this isn't the best advice to the majority of people, but if you have a video of you helping animals, for example, then that's great proof for people,
That's how
right?
you
Because,
win.
yeah, I think it helped us early on, not only just having the YouTube channel, but having a video on the channel telling the story of how we rescued a couple of dogs in Puerto Rico. I think if you watch that video, most people are going to say, okay, well, obviously these people love animals, so they're not going
Hmm.
to hurt mine or be
Hmm.
irresponsible or lose them,
Yeah.
or
How
yeah.
how competitive is it, and like how many places are you applying for? How much time do you think you have to invest to get a place? And then what's like the duration? Like what's the ROI? Are you getting it for like a month at a time, or
Mm.
just like a 10 days while they're on vacation, or
Yeah, it is very competitive, especially in places that are more touristy. For
Mhm.
example, we've seen applications, or what do you call them, listings,
Yeah.
listings on places like Puerto Vallarta, where in a day they get hundreds of requests or applications. Yes, so it can be very competitive. So I don't spend time on the platform. Jim's always the one looking, but you do have to be checking constantly if you have a place in mind, right? Like if you
Mhm.
know you really want to spend some time in, I don't know, Argentina, then you would be, I think on the website you can
Set up notifications.
yeah, for an area where you would like to go and house sit. But you can find from the like, I just need someone to come here tomorrow for one night, to 6 months or even longer than that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so we get notifications from the top countries we want to visit. You can always check. You can always just go on the website and see if there's anything new for an area you might be interested in visiting. But you can set up notifications specifically for a city or for a state or for a country. And so I'm always getting the notifications for the places we want to visit. And as soon as I get one, I just take a look at it. And if it fits our schedule, we'll look into it a little further, but usually we're picking places where we'll be there for at least a couple of weeks, ideally a month. It's nice to be able to know that we're going to, especially if we have to fly to another country, to know
Mhm.
that we're going to be there for a while. For example, next month we're going to Costa Rica and we'll be there taking care of a dog and a cat for 3 weeks.
Mhm.
And then we'll stay a little longer on our own, maybe just get an Airbnb in another part of the country to be able to get out and explore some more, or at least a different part.
Mhm.
Yeah, I really like this. I really like this. Let's mix it up and talk a bit about language learning, learning Spanish. Where to start? There's so much to go over. You know what? I actually wanted to ask you, what are the most common questions that you ask? Just tell me the questions and then maybe we'll run through some of them. But the questions might be, how long is it going to take me to get conversational? How close are Spanish and Portuguese? Is it possible to learn 100% online, or do I need to meet people, or will I learn by exposure, or
Mhm.
which is a common misconception, or what are some of the most common questions or concerns that people seem to have about learning Spanish when they're early in the game?
Yeah, well, that first one, how long will it take for me to get conversational, is very similar to one we hear all the time. How long did it take you to become fluent, or how long can I expect it to take for me to become fluent, right?
Mhm.
And
Hmm.
that is a very difficult question to answer. There's a lot of variables involved there, but I would say that if you are really motivated, and I should qualify that by saying at least willing to spend maybe an hour or two every single day to studying Spanish, then I think most people can become at least somewhat conversational in 6 months to a year. And when I say conversational, I mean able to do most basic things, right? Like uh, greetings, introducing yourself, maybe going out to order food, ask some directions, that sort of thing. Just basic stuff. Not talking about philosophy or finance or some
Mhm.
of the some more intricate topics, which would involve more advanced vocabulary.
Hmm.
And in my case, I would say that, yeah, after, it's hard to go back and remember exactly, but after about a year of studying Spanish, I could get through most basic conversations. There were still, a lot of things that didn't understand, but through context, you can kind of work your way through and get the basic phrases down, like "Perdón, no entendí," right? Like, Sorry, I didn't understand. Can you repeat that?" Those types of things are the phrases that are going to really help you um, improve your fluency, right? Or get closer to fluency. You
Right,
just need
right,
to be
right.
able to know how to be able to carry on the conversation. You don't have to be able to say everything perfectly. Yeah. Uh, Maya, do you have something you'd like to add to that?
Maybe another question that a lot of people ask is how, like, once they know the basics, once they have studied the language for a few months, they they want to know how to get over the fear of just actually using the language with a native speaker. And yes, it can be complicated. For example, when I started speaking English, that was the worst thing. Just speaking English or using the language with another person, because you always have this idea that people are judging you all the time. And overcoming this fear can, I think it's a huge reason why a lot of people don't even try in the first place, to learn a language, because they who wants to be in a situation where they're probably like making or having other people make fun of themselves. And the reality is that when you learn a second language and you actually use the language with a native speaker, instead of them judging you, people are usually surprised that you took the time to learn their language, that you've come
Yeah,
so
people
far, that
respect it.
you yeah, there's um a lot of that, like the recognition of, like, wow, you went through I don't know how many hours of studying so we could have this conversation. And and that's something not a lot of people see when they're starting. And I think just talking about this is very reassuring to people.
Hmm.
Just knowing that, yes, you are going to be in situations where you're not going to understand something, and it might be a little bit embarrassing to realize that you said one thing when you meant to say something completely different. But it's just, mistakes are part of the problem. So
Where would you say are, first of all, do you think that Mexico is a good place to learn Spanish? And if so, where are some of the best places in Mexico to learn?
absolutely. I think that, especially someone from the U.S. or from Canada, Mexico is the neighbor. It's right there. Most of the music that you hear all over the world that's in Spanish is or comes from Mexico. The movies are usually translated in, like, here in Mexico, or like with Latin American accents, but it's actually like Mexican, right? So a lot of the things you find online are coming from Mexico, and there are many more resources that you can find for learning Spanish from this country. And I don't know, Jim, do you want to say something?
I was just gonna say you're gonna upset Bad Bunny about the music part because he's the biggest Latin artist right
Yes, but how many English
now.
speakers can understand him? Not many.
So yeah, Bad Bunny's Spanish is Puerto Rican Spanish, so that is quite a bit different than Mexican Spanish. But
Right.
I'd say Mexico is a great place to learn for other reasons. Like people from Mexico tend to speak rather clearly, and that is really useful when you're learning the language. Of course, in any Spanish speaking country, you'll meet people who mumble or speak really fast, or maybe don't, maybe use a lot of slang, use a lot of vocabulary that you're not used to. But you'll also meet, I'd say for the most part, people who are speaking clearly, not speaking too quickly, and uh, that's really useful for a
Hmm.
Spanish student.
And it's the biggest Spanish speaking country in the world, too. So more opportunities here, I think.
Yeah, and I would
True. You
say
pretty much have to get used to the accent, even if you don't
Right.
choose Mexico.
right.
Yes.
Yeah, and Central Mexico is great. We get asked all the time, why don't you have a retreat in Playa del Carmen or in Tulum? And it's mainly for because of what I was referring to earlier, where often you'll go to a restaurant and sit down and they'll hand you a menu in English if it, in their opinion, you look like you're someone who speaks English, right? If you have lighter
Right.
skin,
There's less of a crutch in the center of Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. You'll find yourself in more situations where people just don't know any English,
Mm-hmm.
or very little English.
Mm-hmm.
For
Jim,
example,
I guess a question
oh yeah.
for you. Oh, sorry to cut you off, but what would you say is the level of English in Mexico, particularly outside of the tourist areas? Because I think a lot of people are curious about how much English Mexican people actually know.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we were just in Colima the other day, and I would say very, very few people speak English to a conversational level. Uh, a lot of people will study English in school, like we'll study Spanish in school, but we know how that goes, right? If you're not really interested or dedicated in learning a lot, then you're probably not going to advance too far, especially considering that, if your friends don't speak much English or aren't interested in it, then you'll if you're like most people, you'll probably lose interest and not study on a regular basis to advance. So when we're in Colima, I'll occasionally get people coming up to me wanting to practice their English, but for the most part, you need Spanish to get by in Colima. Now, it's hard to say for all parts of the country, but I'd say most of rural Mexico doesn't have a lot of English speakers. You're
Mm-hmm.
gonna need to know some Spanish.
Mm-hmm. It changes if you go to a place like, for example, Cholula. We were saying that that's a university town. So uh, places where there's more young people, the younger generations usually speak some English because they take English lessons in high school or university. Pretty much every university in Mexico teaches you at least the basics of English. But other than that, if you go to a town like Comala, which is where my mom lives, which is in Colima, it's the only pueblo mágico in Colima. Only what, like, I want to say maybe 1 out of 100 people can have a conversation with you
Yeah,
or speak some English there.
yeah, I'd say that's
Yeah.
a pretty good estimate.
That's low. But
Yeah,
Hmm.
what's funny about Mexico is like someone will always pop out of nowhere that speaks good English no matter where you are.
Oh, see.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like they're excited to practice. That happens occasionally when we're in Colima or more rural parts of Mexico.
Yeah, because another thing happens too. In many places that are more rural, a lot of people have relatives who have moved to the US or to Canada. Or there's always the taxi driver who tells you, "Oh, 20 years ago I crossed to the US illegally and I worked there for 5 years, but then I decided to go back,
Yeah,
or I was deported." So places that are more rural do tend to have some like a family member here and there who moved to the US and then came back.
right. Hmm.
Do you think that so let's just say a lot of the audience is digital nomads, or maybe they're a bit older, people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, that maybe they got their first remote job or they're retiring, they want to come down to Mexico, they want a smooth transition and they want to basically be able to get by with some amount of English, but they also, I think most of them want to learn Spanish. Are they going to be able to get by only speaking English? And obviously, they can do it in the tourist spots, but would they be able to get by only speaking English in your experience in, say, in Guanajuato or León or Querétaro?
Oof. I feel
Well,
like you could do it if you don't want nothing to do with the people. Like you could go to the store and you could probably just do the self checkout and you don't have to talk to anyone. You could order things online. You could just hang out with other expats in the area. You could do it, but
yeah,
it.
yeah. People do it, and I think a lot of people in that sort of situation end up not staying for long because they don't feel like they belong or that they
Or they're
integrate.
not happy, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
because it's hard to have a social life like that. But yeah, when you say get by, I think it mainly depends on how you define get by, right? Like if it's just survive, absolutely. Yeah, you can point at the menu and try to mouth out what you want or use sign language or
Yeah.
use a translator app. All of those things will help you get by, but your happiness will increase greatly the more Spanish you could speak in these types of places.
And you're missing out on like the best of Mexico, which is the people, right?
Yeah.
So
Interesting. Um, yeah, I'd say in my experience, like people can generally speak pretty well. Um, or I think what you'll find is they know like hundreds, if not thousands, of words, but they just don't
yeah.
have the grammar to like string it together. But they'll
Mm-hmm.
know like an extremely high amount of words on sort of a standalone basis, I guess, and they'll know a lot of like terms.
Yeah, and I think part of that is people who study on their own a lot but don't speak out loud very much.
Mm-hmm.
And we've met a number of people who know a lot of Spanish but have trouble speaking because they're used to just reading Spanish or writing. And if you don't practice moving your mouth to say the words out loud, then you're missing out on part of what it takes to be fluent in a language, right? I can't imagine just learning a language, reading it, writing it, maybe taking some online classes where you don't have to speak, and then getting to a point where you're fluent. You have to speak because it kind of feels to some extent certain things you'll say in another language feel like you're doing gymnastics with your tongue or something, right? Like you have to get used to moving your mouth in the way that it needs to produce the language, and so that takes speaking practice. So I can definitely see where you're coming from, where some people they know a lot of the language but have trouble speaking it. You
Mm-hmm.
have to practice speaking, otherwise it's just never going to come out the way you want it to.
And I think also it's very important to have someone there checking and correcting what you are saying, because I think it happens a lot with people who learn Spanish on their own, who, like Jim was saying, they read it, but they don't have anyone correcting, and so they keep making the same mistakes. And let's say you've heard the typical gringo accent, right? Someone who says "Hola, cómo estás," because they're used to using the letters the way they use them in English, and they
Hmm.
want to give the letters in Spanish the same sounds as they do in English, and they don't understand that this is a different language. Letters, vowels, consonants, they sound different in this other language, so they don't have anyone to mimic or to tell them, in Spanish is actually this way, or why don't you try this other way. So I think that's also important. That can help you a lot too, if you have someone there helping you, making sure you're saying things the proper way.
Definitely. And if you're going to have a teacher who you're having conversation practice with, I think it's really important to look for a teacher who will do that, who will take notes and identify where you're having trouble and then point that out and say, hey, we should work on this because this, you keep saying it, this way, and we got to work on getting you to understand how this concept works, right? Or how the pronunciation of words like this work.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. Um, One of the reasons that I really like your guys' podcast, the Spanish and Go podcast, is because it's 98% in Spanish. It's basically 100% in Spanish.
Mhm.
Um, and I really, really like that because yeah, I mean, I don't need to hear any English really. Let's say I think it's great. I think it's great for pretty much all levels. There are some podcasts that do like 50% English or 30% English, 70% Spanish. I don't know why I can't talk anymore, but Maybe could you walk us through the logic for why you guys chose to do a podcast that was pretty much 100% in Spanish and the benefit that you think that that has for students?
Yeah, well, part of it is just that that's how I learned. And it was a huge revelation for me to discover that after I was able to get some basic Spanish down, listening to real Spanish conversations was the next step to help me take my Spanish from kind of like late beginner, early intermediate to advanced. I didn't realize before listening to podcasts in Spanish how useful this was, because I had it in my head that the way to learn a language was to sit down in a classroom and have a teacher explain the language to you in your native language. And while that can be useful when you're just starting out, to get to more advanced stages in the language, it's much more useful to hear conversations where maybe you're only understanding 20 or 30% at first. But as you are listening to the language, you're picking out the words and phrases that come up again and again and again in the language. And you quickly realize that some of what you've learned in a textbook isn't how the language is most commonly used by native speakers. So the more you listen to the language, the more you're able to make these connections. And one thing I'd like to stress for students who are learning Spanish is that every time you just go to look up a word, you're kind of teaching your brain that you don't need to remember that word, because you can always just look it up again. You can look it up in 3 seconds on your phone and you don't really need to remember it.
It's like when you go to look at the time and then you look away and you immediately forget what time it was.
Yeah, because you can just check again, right? You don't really need to take that mental note like, no, this is important. So when you listen to a podcast entirely in your target language, you have to figure certain things out from their context. And this is actually the best way to memorize new vocabulary and new phrases. Because when you have to sit and kind of figure out what something meant from context, you're doing some of the work that's required to embed that into a deeper part of your memory, your long-term memory.
You're doing what you did when you started learning your first language as a baby.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of people think that you lose this ability as you grow up to be able to figure out a language just by listening to it. But that's not true. We maintain this ability throughout our lives because we're a huge part of our brains is all about communication and deciphering language. And so when people say, I'm just not good at languages, I kind of laugh a little bit. I mean, not at their faces or anything, but it's just like people don't understand that we're built to communicate with one another.
Mm-hmm.
What people aren't um, well, I think what people are really trying to say when they say I'm not good at languages is really that they have trouble accepting that they're going to make lots of mistakes, and they have trouble being embarrassed, and they have trouble finding themselves in awkward situations that make you feel kind of stupid. And
Or
that's,
committing.
yeah, or committing to, yeah,
Yeah.
doing it consistently. So that's something that every language learner has to deal with, right? I'm not.
How do you help people break that mental barrier where they believe it's possible? Because I really think the belief is a huge part of it.
Yeah, well, that's that's difficult, right? Because, well, one of my favorite quotes is, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're probably right. Right? Like
Mhm.
if you think you can do it, you're going to put your mind to it and believe you can and just keep going and say, I'm going to get this even if it's hard right now. I just have to plow through it. Um, some people, they that's the hardest thing, is convincing themselves that they can do it. Honestly, when I started learning Spanish, I wasn't sure I would ever get fluent, but I was motivated to, and I was motivated to get a little bit better every single day.
Mhm.
And so I didn't really doubt myself. I didn't know how far I would be able to get. I'd never learned another language before, at least not to the extent that I wanted to learn Spanish, not to where I could actually move to a Spanish speaking country and live my life in a foreign language. But I always believed that if I just kept practicing and getting a little bit better every single day, that I would eventually get to a point where I would have met my goal, or at least been able to get by in the language. So yeah, you have to believe in yourself, and you have to be dedicated to the process, right? Just getting a little bit better every single day. If I can do it, anybody can do it. I I strongly believe that. It's just some people get it in their heads that no, I can't. I'm not good with languages, and people sometimes are just too embarrassed to even try, because you have to make mistakes to learn the language. Nobody just picks up a language and speaks it perfectly from day one. It just doesn't work that way.
Hmm. I agree. I've never taken a formal Spanish class or anything like that. I really learned. I can accredit podcasts to being a huge part of my learning process.
Mhm.
I started out with some of the bilingual podcasts, um, but I don't even listen to those anymore. And what I like about Spanish and Go is I can still listen to it. Like I listen to native stuff that's made for a Spanish speaking audience, and then
Mhm.
I flip it back and forth between things like that, and then Spanish and Go and other podcasts that I guess you could call it like intermediate level,
Mhm.
because you can sort of listen to it at any level of Spanish, um, uh, because it's in Spanish. But the ones that are bilingual, I've completely stopped listening to that. So I think that's one great aspect of your guys' strategy is it kind of works for all levels. I think. It's easier to understand a gringo speaking Spanish for us just because I don't know what it is. I think just because some of the syllables
Yeah.
sound a bit more English. Like maybe you'll say naturaleza in a way that sounds more like the word nature, or I
Mhm.
don't know, things like that. But it's just a little bit easier to identify. Um, where was I going with this? But yeah, everyone needs to listen to the Spanish and Go podcast. Oh, by the way, sometimes I've been going on hikes with the Mexican girl I've been seeing. I'm doxing myself too much, but and we'll go on hikes and we'll listen to Spanish and Go, and it'll be like 7 misconceptions about Mexico, and we'll listen to it together. And she'll be like, "Oh, that's so true," and
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
other international couples have sent us messages like that before too, that they listen to the podcast together, and I think that's really great. What we really try to do with the podcast is to have just interesting episodes overall. Uh, some of the more uh, learn Spanish focused themed episodes are really popular, but we like to focus on cultural aspects because they can be interesting on their own, whether you're learning Spanish or not, right?
Yeah.
If they can be interesting for people who already speak Spanish, just to hear, you know, their culture kind of being examined, or sharing a culture that like another Spanish speaking country, for example, right? For a Mexican who already speaks Spanish to listen to an episode where we're talking about slang in Ecuador, right?
Mhm.
That can be interesting even for native speakers. So we try to focus mainly on episodes like that where we're sharing different cultural uh, differences on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good mix where some episodes are grammar, some episodes are cultural or historical, or 7 curious phrases or
Mhm.
things like that. I think you guys have like a really perfect blend of different styles of episodes.
Awesome. Thank you.
So again, guys, Spanish and Go podcast, one of my favorites. And like I said offline, really need you guys to get on Twitter and engage a little bit because I tweet a lot about learning Spanish, and then people always without fail reply like, "What are your favorite podcasts to learn Spanish?" And I always just do at Spanish and Go.
Awesome. Well, thanks, man. We appreciate it. Yeah, we'll try to be a little more active there. There's so many different social media channels, and yeah, we've just been so busy focused on uh, having more retreats and announcing new cities and new dates
The
and
membership for the podcast,
yeah.
then trying to go back into the rhythm of publishing YouTube videos.
Oh yeah, it's a lot. We need to better delegate so we can
Yes.
be everywhere all the time.
How do you think that most people find you?
It's a combination.
Oh yeah, yeah, because the YouTube channel, that's where we have the biggest following by far. Uh, so when we started having our immersion retreats, everyone who would join us followed us because of the YouTube channel. But the channel is much more focused on beginner Spanish speakers or people who are curious about learning Spanish or
Hmm.
curious about traveling to a Spanish speaking country. And so we would have more beginners joining us on the retreats then. But when we started doing the podcast, kind of toward the end of the pandemic or when people started traveling again, then we started seeing more people join us because of the podcast. And that's why we divide our retreats now into 2 different weeks. So if we have a Oaxaca retreat, we're actually going to do 2 weeks, or we always do 2 weeks, where the first week is for beginner intermediates and the second week is for intermediate advanced speakers. So people can join us if they're just starting to learn Spanish the first week. And if they already maybe listened to the podcast, then they would probably be more comfortable joining us in the second week where everything is in Spanish. The first week we hold people's hands a little more with the English and explain more in English than we do in the second week. But second week is all about immersing yourself in the Spanish language with very little Spanish or very little English spoken.
Do you guys do like one-on-one lessons?
We don't do one-on-one lessons. We have a weekly group conversation class that Natalia, um, who helps us with the podcast and the podcast membership, she is the teacher for that, and often I'll be there to just chat and participate. But we don't do one-on-one classes.
I always thought a cool idea would be just to like launch sort of a school, and maybe you guys could hire a whole bunch of people from Colima or whatever, and just have them do like italki style lessons. Maybe put people on like a monthly plan, and give them, I don't know, the classes every Tuesday and Thursday night, something like that, and they just pay like a set price and um, sort of build like a little Spanish school. Have you ever thought about doing something like that?
The entrepreneur in me has absolutely thought of that. However, there are just so many fantastic schools that are already started, and we already feel like our attention is so divided between the different projects within Spanish and Go that we have going on that we usually just recommend some of the platforms that already exist to people who are looking to do one-on-one classes. But who knows? Maybe someday. First, we got to visit every Spanish-speaking country, and then we can think about adding other projects. But yeah, we often recommend platforms like Lingoda, which has a fantastic language challenge, and I'm really thinking about joining this again. I did it once for Spanish, but basically, it's you commit to taking a set number of lessons. When I did this, it was 3 months every single day. Every every month for 3 months, 1 hour class in Spanish. And I'm going to join. I really am considering joining again for German soon as well, and that would be a month or 2 months now, actually, of a 1 hour class every day. And then we also recommend like Baselang, where they have that model where it's a subscription. You just pay a set amount every month, and then you have access to unlimited classes.
Hmm.
And with both of those platforms, they have one-on-one classes available. Mm-hmm.
For sure. So we definitely want to give you guys a chance to talk about your projects and the retreats. Before we do that, I have one last question that's a little bit out of order, but I wanted to make sure I asked you guys. You guys being a couple, a dual citizen couple, I wanted to ask about kids and raising a family. Um, do you think that would you prefer to raise your kids in the United States or Mexico? And I'm gonna assume you're probably gonna say Mexico, and if so, why?
Ah, yes, I think we for the longest time we have been saying no, we don't want to have children, but as we get older, now we're like maybe in a few years. But yeah, we have. I think raising kids bilingual is uh, like there's no question that's going to happen. And where? Well, yeah, I think we have talked about settling down in a Spanish speaking country, probably Mexico, but we don't know yet where. For example, when we went to Ecuador, we really loved this city called Cuenca, and I could see ourselves raising a family there. It felt really safe, clean. It was very green, and they have awesome public transportation. So I guess it depends on where we want to settle down in a few years, right?
Yeah, yeah. It seems like raising children in a Spanish speaking country would be our first choice. I don't, I can't think of a reason why we would do so in the United States. I mean, for pretty much every reason, even from, um, giving birth in Mexico is going to be a fraction of the cost that it would be in the
Hmm.
US, right? Um, so yeah, there's a lot of things to consider, like being close to family, but obviously, Mai's mom and dad are in Mexico, so they would get to see their grandchild or grandchildren grow up in Mexico. And my parents love coming down here, so I don't think that would be too much of a problem. But yeah, everything we've thought about if we wanted to start a family would be that Mexico or a Spanish speaking country would be uh, our first choice.
Sweet. Well, yeah, please use this time to tell us a little bit about all the projects that you guys have on the go, some of your upcoming retreats. Feel free to talk about the retreats in as much detail as you need. You guys have been very gracious with your time and would love to hear about it.
Yeah, well, our Spanish immersion retreats are a unique program. They're the first of their kind in Mexico, where we have a week long event basically where we'll bring people down who are interested in learning Spanish, and we'll immerse them not only in the language but also in the culture and the traditions, and of course the food as well. We eat lots of food on these retreats, but every single day we have a class in the morning that well, actually two classes. The well, one class is with the entire group. The other class we break the group into two to focus down on their level, but the themes relate to what we'll be doing later on in the day, so that everything you learn in the classes you can later on apply um, in real life in Mexico. So we'll have, for example, a class for week one where we're showing them how to order food. Later on, we'll go to a restaurant, and then they'll get to practice what they learned, as well as throughout the week, of course, because some students have said that this is like a food tour as well. Every retreat has a food tour in the cities that we have the retreats in, but the whole week is much like a food tour as well. And then we're talking about the history and the culture of every city we're in. So, for example, in Guanajuato, the cradle of independence for Mexico, they'll learn about how the country started because there are a lot of important landmarks there, and so we talk about that during the retreats as well. So it's really an integration of classes and going out and getting to use what you learned right away in Mexico.
And traveling with a group of friends. This is my favorite part of the retreats. When people arrive the first day, everyone is so shy and quiet. But then by the end of the week, everyone is just so close, right? It feels like a family, and our groups are not too big. We keep them between 10 and 12 people, depending on the city. We do maximum 12 people in Oaxaca because of the accommodations we have there are a little bit bigger,
Mhm.
and maximum of 10 people in Guanajuato because everything is smaller in Guanajuato. Restaurants are smaller, the streets are smaller. So it's not a huge group, so it really gives us the opportunity to spend um, time with everyone and answer questions and help everyone there. It's a really fun time. It's, I don't know, I feel like when you want to travel sometimes a lot of people don't go on their dream trip because they don't have any friends to go with, and joining an experience like this one gives you friends. I mean, gives you the opportunity to experience a new place with other people who have similar interests that as the ones you have, right? Learning languages and exploring the culture and the traditions of other places. So it's a really fun time.
Yeah, and this was something we wanted to do for a long time when we first thought of Spanish and Go. The idea was to kind of do what mine did for me and be able to take people along to visit different parts of Mexico and to learn about the culture and the traditions and the food, as I mentioned, through the eyes of the locals, right? So, our obviously Mai's from Mexico, and she's on every retreat, and we also have local guides. And it really does feel like you're just with a bunch of friends on vacation, but you're also learning tons of Spanish at the same time. And I really think the best way to learn Spanish is to immerse yourself and to be able to apply what you're learning as you go. And you learn so much faster when you're experiencing things firsthand, right? You can learn about different types of Mexican food, but it's another thing to be sitting down and trying it and talk about the ingredients and talk about what it's called and what that means and where that comes from, and maybe how certain foods are more typical of some regions of Mexico versus others. That adds so much to the experience to where you're able to embed that into your long-term memory much faster than you might do so otherwise just studying about it in a textbook. So it's a truly immersive experience, an unforgettable time, and we really encourage you to check it out if you are interested in learning Spanish and visiting Spanish-speaking countries. We always get rave reviews from uh, our students who have joined us before, and some have joined us multiple times because
Hmm.
they love it so much.
Yeah, it's cool also to see how a lot of the people who join us are first time visitors of Mexico. And after joining us on a retreat, they come back on their own with a lot more confidence in their skills and in their ability to explore the country on their own because they have done it with us. So that's also really cool to see. But we've done 10 already.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and we have over 100 students registered so far, and certainly by the time this podcast episode comes out, we'll have new dates up for 2023. We're just about sold out for the spring, but we'll have new opportunities for the fall and winter of 2023.
mhm.
That's really cool. Where are you guys thinking of having the next ones?
Yeah, so we have dates planned for Guanajuato and Oaxaca, and we're working on getting Mexico City added as well. This is something that we had planned and announced previously, and then the pandemic hit. So we need to do a quick group trip just to kind of reevaluate what we had planned previously. Obviously, prices around the world have changed quite a bit, especially in Mexico City. So we just need to kind of go back and review that before we announce new dates for Mexico City.
But
Very
probably
nice.
again Oaxaca or Guanajuato.
Yeah, yep,
Yeah, I
and
remember I remember a podcast episode where you guys went to like the Central Market in Oaxaca and we're talking about like authentic beverage there.
Mm.
And I enjoyed that one.
Yeah, that was the
Tejate.
yep,
Tejate.
Tejate, and we had some mezcal there as well,
Yeah, it was
right?
cute listening to the abuelita like talk about the process of how she made this drink and all the love she put into it.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I guess I was thinking of the YouTube video we did, but we did the Tejate beverage on the podcast. That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
See. Have
Yep.
you tried that drink? Oh, it's so delicious.
Honestly, I was asking someone from another part of Mexico, and they hadn't even heard of it.
No, it's yeah, you can only find it in Oaxaca because the some of the ingredients only are only there in Oaxaca, but it's the most traditional drink there. It's my favorite like pre-Hispanic drink now.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, after I heard that episode, I put a star on my Google Maps on the Mercado Municipal or whatever in Oaxaca,
Yeah.
and I'll make it at some point. So how can someone sign up for the retreat?
Yeah, just go to SpanishandGo.com/immersion dash retreats. And actually, if you just go to the main website, right at the navigation up above, you'll see the cities that we're currently offering. And then we have the main page where we explain what the retreats are all about and the dates that are available. So they go quick. Every time
Hmm.
we announce these, we're surprised at how quickly they sell out. So hopefully by the time you go to the website, if you want to join us, there will be some spots available left. But yeah, we keep announcing new ones. We do have a limit to how many we do every year. We wish we could do them more often, but we need to obviously keep going on our mission to visit every Spanish-speaking country. So it's a bit of a balance, but we hope you can join us. It's a great time.
Yeah, tons of respect for keeping up the adventurous digital nomad style energy, working and traveling at the same time. I almost should ask you more about that on the podcast, but would love to hear a dedicated episode on Spanish and Go about how you guys maintain the work travel balance.
Yeah.
Oof, it's tough.
Yeah, it's tricky. We're still figuring it out, but yeah, we'd be happy to come back sometime and share a little more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, we'll be able to find a couple different ways to work together in the future because, yeah, like I said, everyone in my audience needs to improve their Spanish pretty much. um, but yeah, Jim and my Spanish and Go. Thank you guys so much for joining us on another episode of the My Latin Life podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.